Attachment trauma. That doesn't sound great, does it? Truthfully, it's not that great. So what's the deal with attachment trauma and how do we heal from it if it's not that great? Well, I'm going to give you a little recap here and give you some ideas on what you can do to heal. Okay, so what is attachment trauma? Attachment trauma is basically the cause of insecure attachment styles. Insecure attachment styles are the ones that are not the secure attachment style. So basically, they're the anxious preoccupied style, the dismissive avoidance style, and the fearful avoidance style. If this is all new to you, I have videos on these things. I'm not going to get into detail here. Basically, our attachment styles are the way that we generally bond with people. It's not set in stone that this is the way we're always going to bond with somebody, but it's kind of like our pattern and it's our go-to when we're going to be intimate with somebody, into a closer relationship with them. And the way that they're formed is in childhood, usually in infanthood, before a time when we would really even remember that this is happening, because our brain may not even have the ability to process memory yet. Your attachment style is basically formed by the way that your parents met your needs, specifically your emotional needs, but also your physical needs. You know, did they feed you? Did they change your diaper when it needed to be changed? All those things are important to a baby. Remember, an infant, a baby, cannot fend for itself. A baby has no coping skills. The only coping skill that they really have is to scream and cry out to try to get their parents or their caregiver or whoever to come and take care of them. Now, the general idea here is that for somebody who becomes more on the anxious, preoccupied side, their parents would meet their needs, but they would not always meet their needs. Like, the baby had to cry a lot to get the caregiver to come over and feed them or change their diaper. And maybe it was even a little bit inconsistent. It wasn't like the parent just came over and tended to their needs. There was always like some kind of a delay, or there was a mismatch in them actually getting their needs met. For somebody with the dismissive avoidance style, the parent probably generally didn't meet their needs, and baby learned to just not cry out, because some parents, for example, they get very irritated or they get annoyed or they just get uncomfortable when a baby's crying. They don't know what to do. It scares them. It intimidates them. They get too much anxiety, and so they don't take care of the baby. So in this case, the baby learns, if I don't cry, then I might get my needs met. You know, I'm not going to get my needs met if I cry because the parent gets too rattled and crazy, but if I keep quiet, if I stuff it all in basically, and I don't express myself, then I'll get my needs met. So that's why we wind up with something like a dismissive avoidant attachment. So you've got anxious preoccupied learned they have to cry more and more and more and more, and the dismissive avoidant learned that they have to cry less and less and less and less. And then the fearful avoidant had a parent that was just kind of like all over the place, inconsistent, possibly abusive, and so they really don't know what to do to get their needs met because there was no pattern to follow. Now, if you're somebody who's got the anxious preoccupied style, you may be able to look back into your childhood and be like, yeah, that's kind of how my parents or my caregivers or whoever was to me. I totally relate to that. But if you're on the and that's because, you know, these are patterns. Just because, you know, this happens in infanthood, your parents or your caregivers or whoever, they probably continued that pattern as you were a child and into adolescence and possibly into adulthood. And so it makes sense that you would have a memory in childhood of your parent kind of being this way. But people who are avoidant, they tend to say that they had a good childhood, which is very confusing at first, but then you remember that they learned to stuff their emotions down. And so their life sometimes is very much emotionless, and they don't factor in the emotional component at all. So they just look at it as, yeah, my mom took me to school, and yeah, my dad, you know, went out and, I don't know, bought me something. Like, they don't think about the emotional component of, like, what did it feel like for you? Because that part got stuffed down. So if you're avoidant and you don't have a memory of having a terrible childhood, it could be because you didn't realize that it was terrible, and today, now, still, you don't really think of it as terrible. And I just caught myself there. You didn't have to have like a totally, totally terrible childhood, but remember, this is attachment trauma, so you had to have your needs not getting met. Now, some of you are going to hear all this and be like, why does it always go back to childhood? I didn't have issues with my childhood. And like I said, if you're somebody who's avoidant, maybe that might be the reason why you feel that way. But you can also switch your attachment style and have issues with your attachment style in adulthood. You can suffer through attachment trauma in adulthood because you may have gotten very close and intimate with somebody who hurt you really badly, who didn't meet your needs. Maybe there was an ongoing pattern in a relationship where your needs weren't getting met. And you can go through the same kind of what what I would think of maybe as an injury that switches the way that you see people in the world and the way that you see yourself relating to them. I will add this little caveat though, that I think personally, when I look at this whole situation of attachment trauma, that people often blame their ex, or they look at the partners they've had in their life, but they don't make the connection between the reason why they got with that ex, the reason why they even got into a relationship like that, is because they have this pattern that started way, way, way back in infanthood. Really, if this is something that you think that you're dealing with, then you'll want to go in and see a therapist, and they'll be able to sort that out with you, where it comes from. Does it even matter where it comes from? But we're going to talk a little bit about healing from it and maybe some things to think about here. All right, so something that I think happens when people go through attachment trauma, and it's not exclusive to attachment trauma, but I don't know, this kind of popped into my brain while I was thinking about talking about this, is I think that we internalize a lot of messages to try to cope. You know, a baby doesn't have language yet to really understand what's going on and to deal with the things that they're experiencing when their needs aren't getting met. But once they start to develop language, we start to come up with reasons. We start to come up with answers for why our caregiver or our parents treats us the way that they do. And so somebody who is more on the anxious side of things, they may start to feel like, well, it's just scary to be alone. I can't be alone. I'm a weak person. When I'm alone, somebody's going to hurt me. Or when they get into a relationship, they may feel like if I don't actively try to keep my partner around, they're going to leave me. I always need to have them close by, or they will leave. I have to keep them here. Somebody who's more on the avoidance side of things may have these messages going through their head of, I can't show any weakness. I have to be strong. I have to be confident. I'm not allowed to let them see me crack. And they might have this general feeling of, if I let somebody get too close, I'm going to get hurt. So people need to stay away from me. Back off. And I think that a thought that kind of runs through the heads of both sides of attachment trauma, whether you're avoidant or you're anxious, is that you're unlovable, that there's something fundamentally wrong with you. And I will tell you that all of these thoughts are incorrect, but you have to challenge them. You have to remind yourself that the way that you're thinking isn't really healthy for you. Okay, there's something that I want to point out here. When we talk about attachment trauma, the word trauma is in there, and trauma can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And I'm throwing that out there because it was something that was relevant to me and my own issues with an anxious preoccupied attachment style. And I found personally that I wasn't able to really resolve that until I went in and addressed the PTSD. This isn't going to be true for everybody. Not everybody has to be having PTSD as a result of attachment trauma. But if you're interested, I have some books that I use to help me get through it. I know for people who are more avoidant, they may not be so willing to go in to see a therapist, but they might be willing to check out a book. Go ahead and check out those books that I have over on Amazon if you're interested. Here's the thing though, if you're going to try to do this stuff on your own, and I really do think it's a good idea to go in and see a therapist as well. I was also seeing a therapist. I just kind of use the books to kind of accelerate my healing. But you got to do the work. You can't just read the book and think that things are going to change. You actually have to do the work. There's a workbook in there that I used, and I found that very helpful to kind of map out what my issues were. All right, so what else can we do to heal from attachment trauma if this sounds like us? If we know that we have this pattern of being stuck more on the anxious side, more on the avoidance side, or maybe bouncing between the two and never really getting stuck in the middle where we should be, somewhere in the secure area, what do we do? Well, if you're the more anxious person, and this is going to be true for every style, you're going to have to do the opposite of what you're used to doing. So if you tend to get anxious, if you tend to not want to be alone, if you tend to always chase after your partner, do the opposite. Spend time alone, start taking up hobbies, start doing things on your own. When you are alone, don't tell yourself that this is dangerous and scary. Tell yourself that you're okay, that you're confident, that you're going to be fine. When it feels like your partner is leaving you and abandoning you, remind yourself that's just a feeling. It's not what's actually happening, and allow them their space and their time to be able to have their independence and do the things that they need to do. Instead of looking for examples of why they're going to leave you, look for examples of why you can believe that they're going to stay with you. If you're on the more avoidance side of things, then you're going to have to get used to being around people and feeling comfortable around people. I know that sounds difficult. I know it's not what you're used to, but like, this is part of healing. You're going to have to do it. So when you're around people, when you're around coworkers, when you're around people maybe who you're already a little more comfortable with because it's not so intimate and deep, start opening up the conversation a little bit more. Show a little bit of your emotion. Trust me, they're not going to hurt you, especially people who don't know you that well. And if they do hurt you, you'll get over it. You'll continue living life. You've been through this before and you know this. So remind yourself that you can get through this. You can show these emotions and survive. And start communicating with your partners. When you have a partner that's encroaching on you, when it feels like they're shrouding over you, when they're stifling you and pushing down on you and it feels like it's way too much, tell them. It's not weak to tell them. That's just communication. You're just giving the information that they need to change their behavior. Now, I know you may have had people in the past who you have told and they didn't listen, but at least give your current partner the opportunity to do that. Remind yourself that you don't always have to be the tough one. You don't always have to be the confident one who's got everything under control. It's okay to let loose. It's okay to be a little frazzled and frustrated and let out some anger and let out some happiness every now and then. And if you're on the fearful end of things where you kind of bounce between the two, then you're going to have to be a little bit more careful about this. Just try to counteract both feelings. Try to get used to recognizing when you're having one of these fearful feelings, and if it's really matching with reality, if it actually makes sense that your partner's leaving you, or if it actually makes sense that your partner's going to smother you, because chances are it's probably not true, but you got to get used to challenging it. And instead of going to thoughts that everything is insecure and everything is unsafe and everything's going to fall apart, look for evidence that things are okay. Remind yourself of how long the relationship has been going so far. Remind yourself of all the positive things that have happened in your relationship. Remind yourself of all of the good. Don't focus so much on the bad. There is one thing that I think we can all use in moments of introspection that will really help with attachment trauma, and that is empathy. If you can take some time when you're alone, probably, because it's going to be hard in the moment if you're in the middle of an argument or if you're in the middle of a discussion or something, but especially when you're alone, think about your partner. Think about how you would react if you were your own partner. And I know you might think to yourself like, oh, but I would love this. But no, really think, okay, if it wasn't me, if I was my partner, how would I feel if I constantly got these texts all day while I was in the middle of work? Or how would I feel if I was feeling insecure and I went to my partner and they just totally ignored me and went to the other room? Probably it would suck. Empathy is like a magical power. Okay, let's not really go there because I hate when people think it's a magical power, but it's cool because once we use empathy, we're getting outside of ourselves and our perspective, and we're introducing new ideas, and we're maybe seeing the situation differently, and that's what's going to help us to be able to shift when we start to understand how other people might perceive the way that we're behaving. Maybe we'll realize the way we're behaving isn't that great and healthy for a good relationship, and we can start to change. Now, please remember, nobody has to be perfect here. You don't have to have like perfect secure attachment to be in the perfect healthy relationship. Nobody needs that kind of pressure to be perfect all the time, okay? You just want to move closer to secure. It's okay to have moments when you're more anxious. It's okay to have moments when you're more avoidant, and we all have those natural tendencies. That's fine. The important message here is that you can heal from attachment trauma. Things can change, and your relationships and your love life and your intimacy can all improve. And honestly, even myself, since like dealing with all this stuff in my personal life, I feel like just generally, like life feels a little bit better. It feels like there's not so much of a weight on my shoulders. So tell me, what do you think about all of this? Do you know all of this already and still have trouble doing all of it? Because that's something I'd like to hear. What do you think are your struggles? Let me know down below in the comments and we'll see what we can do about it.